And here we are.
Nice intro.
Our first century. Yeah, well,
Mhm.
Dan created it all by himself.
Wow. All
And
right.
I thought I did
Kudos.
an excellent job on it. So Dan Gwynn is he's the founder and chief prevaricator for Francis Schaeffer Studies and author of the book that we'll be talking about. And so, Dan, why don't you lead us on? What do you want to talk about? This is the genesis of Francis Schaeffer. By the way, um, I have a lot of respect for Francis Schaeffer. Don Williams also does, but perhaps my favorite book is The Church at the End of the 20th Century. And it seems to me almost prophetic in what he had written because he basically, as he went through it, he was laying out if the church does this, here's what I think will happen. If the church doesn't do this, here's what I think will happen. And the church didn't do the what he had suggested, and what he suggested would happen did happen.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I think he was uh I'm not saying he's a prophet, but I'm saying he really did analyze what was going on, and I thought was quite good at it. He also talked about things that sort of were close to my heart. He has a section in there about having non-believers in your home and how you want to treat them in order to get to the gospel. So, pretty
Mm.
interesting guy. He really was transformative for a lot of people, and I think gave apologetics more of a um, let's say a popular apologetics,
Mm.
something laymen can grab a hold of, and he could speak to academics as well. So that would be my personal view of him. And with that, Dan, lead on.
Well, hello everyone. It's really great to be here with you. I'm truly honored to know these guys, in particular, the two Dons in my life. Both of them advise heavily at different points and have spoken into a lot of my thought over the years, and especially we've Donald Williams too is heavily active on our Facebook group as a leader there, and regularly has provided so much insight into the studies, and so yeah, it's just a wonderful thing, and appreciate the two ministries as well that part of this EMNR and Midwest Christian Outreach. So it's just wonderful to connect like this, and also just some people who are here wanting to learn. That makes me excited, frankly. So my topic, of course, is my book. Truth Amidst Tension, the Practical Apologetic Methodology of Francis Schaeffer. And I just want to, before I get too heavy into the topic, I want to just make sure that I communicate a little bit about us. Of course, there's the book. It's, as you know, it's available on Amazon, and you can get that there. But I want to let you know a little bit about the balance that we're seeking, in particular with Francis Schaeffer Studies. And as I start speaking here, guys, if you hear a little bit of noise in the background, my family's upstairs eating. So they decided that this would be a good time to eat and make noise. So we'll see how this goes. So Francis Schaeffer Studies, one of the things that we really seek to do is to have a guiding principle in our studies that is biblical. And specifically, it's Hebrews 13:7. Remember your leaders, those who spoke to you the word of God, and consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. This is both a guiding principle, but also a challenge to us. Challenge to myself as I'm a vocational minister. I don't do this full time. I'm working 9 to 5 ish. I'm a contractor. I have my own business, and so I'm doing a lot there, but then I'm doing a lot of studies on the side, and then also doing social media. So I'm always trying to make sure that I'm trying to imitate what Schaeffer did in the right way, and that I consider the outcome of their way of life and try to apply that. But not just because Schaeffer is an important person, or that I'm setting Schaeffer up on a pedestal. One admonishment that is given to us from Dr. Bruce A. Little. He's the custodian of the Francis Schaeffer collection at Southeastern Baptist. And he said, Schaeffer is not an icon to be venerated, but a Christian scholar evangelist from whom we can learn much in our passion to reach the nations for Christ. So on one hand, we want to remember our leaders, yet at the other hand, we want to not make them into some sort of venerated icon. And I've had people at times, even on social media, approach us and either or message me or whatever and say, why are you making so much out of Francis Schaeffer? You must, you've idolized this guy. And I'm like, no, here's the guiding verse, and here's my mindset. I'm not in a state of worship with respect to him. I only respect Schaeffer and follow Schaeffer because Schaeffer followed Christ. And when Schaeffer has done that rightly, he's exemplified the victory that Christ has won in the world. And that's a testimony before the watching world and before each other, too, that it shows something of the love of God for us. So I always make sure I clarify that. One thing that I want to share, too, as we talk about the topic of the book, Truth Amidst Tension, the practical apologetic methodology of Francis Schaeffer. One of the reasons for this book is specifically that I saw a need. When we had our Francis Schaeffer Studies social media groups, there's various ones that we have, but mainly the biggest one on Facebook. There's a lot of people that are involved there, and I've regularly had people either ask me the question directly, maybe once or twice in the main chat, but a lot of times people will message me privately. Sometimes people message me privately for spiritual advice, and so it's kind of like a side ministry that nobody sees, but praise God that I've helped some people. And so what is Schaeffer's apologetic is usually this question that comes up from time to time. And back before I wrote the book, I really struggled with this question because there's no book entitled Schaeffer's Apologetic. Schaeffer is not an academic apologist, so he didn't formally write a treatise on this is Schaeffer's Apologetic. And I think there's a reason for that, and I'll explain that in a bit. But also, there's an understanding, if you want to really truly understand what Schaeffer's getting at, you usually have to read several books, maybe some essays or articles, just a collection of things that I've found that kind of piece it all together. A lot of it's in his complete works in small segments, and sometimes it's almost in passing even. And so trying to get people at the heart of it can be a little bit of a challenge without giving them, 5 books to read or whatever. And I think also too, from someone who maybe is wanting to start, they're a little bit overwhelmed. And then if I went to the other question, like, well, maybe I can give them a book. And so my problem I had there was that much of the scholarship was usually academic, and it often were embroiled in various debates over classification. Basically, how do I classify Schaeffer's apologetic? And so they would focus so much on the classification that sometimes they wouldn't really unpack his methodology. I found that to be really strange, and I found it to be, maybe it was good academic fun, but I felt really like there needs to be something a little bit closer to popular, not completely unacademic, but not necessarily just purely academic, where it's so overwhelming that maybe people don't even understand some of these terms that they're talking about. And so then another one was that Schaeffer's Apologetics is composed of very subtle notes that have significant implications. Sometimes even when I communicate it, I'm kind of in the back of my mind, I'm running things through my head with a little bit of fear here, because when I start to explain Schaeffer's Apologetic and some of the nuances, I feel like that there's a challenge at times because sometimes people get the wrong idea, or they don't think deeply enough, or there's an obstacle in their own understanding to understand what Schaeffer's saying. So it's really strange in that way. And I've actually even met academic scholars who considered themselves to be Schaeffer apologists, who were flatly, basically, they did not understand Schaeffer. So they weren't necessarily rightly labeled a Schaeffer apologist, even though they thought they were. That's a little strange at times. And also, there's various like other different types of debates in this scope too that I'll mention. Like I went to a conference one time, and one prominent scholar was there, and he happened to be speaking and on apologetics, and he talked about Schaeffer's apologetic as a girly apologetic. I'll explain why he did that, but it's a blatant misunderstanding. And so you have sometimes where people, they take a little bit or a little slice of Schaeffer, and they've maybe formed some opinions. And actually, there's even several books that me and the Labrie guys talk about from time to time, where we can tell that the writer specifically like read maybe one book of Schaeffer, and then they formed an opinion and then wrote a whole book about why they oppose Schaeffer. And it's a strange thing to me, because Schaeffer was not really a type of person that was wanting to be embroiled in debate. In fact, he wanted to be just encouraging people to bring others to salvation. Can
I weigh in on this? I just feel
absolutely. Go ahead.
No. And I mentioned from time to time we're going to interrupt you just because we like to do that.
Yeah, yeah, and I welcome it. So,
and I'll cast this out here for what it's worth. I think it's true. Too many apologists view apologetics as the be-all end-all of how we need to approach defending the faith. Whereas I would suggest that apologetics is simply a tool that we can use to reach the lost or to disciple the saved. It's a tool. It isn't the end in itself. And depending on who you are is kind of determine how you approach the use of the tool. So Francis Schaeffer, I would suggest, was using it as a pastor, and so his methodology revolved around pastoring people in this area. I know another one, Craig Ireland in Australia. That's exactly how he operates. He's a brilliant apologist, but everything he does is to encourage believers as well as reach non-believers. My pastor is the same way. I think Don Williams is very much like that as well. So everything is not always about the argument. It's about, how do I reach this person?
Right.
As the token academic in the room, I can tell you, and people who aren't part of the academic world, I think, don't understand this, and people who are part of it don't understand it. And when they're speaking to people outside of it, they forget. The culture of academia is it's constantly encouraging you not to tell the truth as best you can, but to distinguish your version of the truth from everybody else's.
Right.
I mean, if you're part of the academic world, and most of these guys who are writing about Schaeffer are, everything about the way their world functions, they're not setting out to do that, but that's the way they've been taught to operate, and they don't even realize that they're doing it. And you see that reflected in the kind of things that Dan's been mentioning, the kinds of misunderstandings that happen. Is academics who aren't self-aware enough to realize how they're being influenced by the culture of academia.
Oh, good point. Okay, Dan.
Yeah. No, great. I'm glad to hear you guys mention that, because it's something that, you see, and I found it good to actually speak with other apologists as well who knew Schaeffer, and they were telling me that they understood this, that yes, this is going on, and they're wondering why, and and we can attribute it to a lot of different things, evangelical camps. Sometimes there are specific territorial lines specific in apologetics, because the defenders of faith sometimes get very good at defending, and then they sometimes defend against each other. so that happened at least a couple times in Schaeffer's life, and so there's that. And then another thing here is so I wanted to share with you just a little bit of my background, just to show a little bit of what I've been involved in. So since 2011, I've been to yearly lectures at International Society of Christian Apologetics, and at which with these the two Dons, right? And so that's been a wonderful experience, but been able to get a lot of tremendous feedback, and a lot of the corpus of my book were lectures at ISCA. And so
now for those who don't know what ISCA is,
mm-hmm.
better explain it.
Yeah, I mean, so if you go to ISCA is really kind of an academic thing at the moment, but it has specific avenues where academics and apologists can get together and discuss their work and do presentations. So we have workshops where people basically present on their current work, and sometimes along with the topic that we're going with, and then get a chance to get interaction from other scholars, and it's sort of a way to feed the scholars. And
I think Don wants people to understand it's an acronym for International Society of Christian Apologetics.
Oh, right? So I did mention the name, but yeah, thank you. So yeah, go ahead, Don.
It's easy to miss.
Yeah, and so that part of it too, I got kind of pulled in, frankly, into the group, and then I feel like that between Dr. Williams and Bill Roach and some of the other guys that have been there, they've kind of taken me under their wing and sort of guided me along through this process. And I learned, I frankly had not written academic papers at this level before, or any of that content. So I got a chance to actually write it, but then I have this peculiar thing. Is my day job as a web developer programmer, and I also have experience as a business analyst where I write technical documentation. And it's interesting how that the business analyst technical documentation carries over into apologetics, but that's a side note there. And then, so I also attend numerous yearly conferences at L'Abri, Rochester, Minnesota. So I go there every year for a conference in Rochester, and that's to the L'Abri conference. There is from Schaeffer's actual ministry. His ministry, L'Abri, is still going on. It was founded in Switzerland, but it migrated back here into the States, and specifically Rochester, whenever he was in the Mayo Clinic. And so that branch has been there ever since, and they do a yearly conference. So I interact with a lot of the Schaeffer scholars and bounce their information off of them. Tremendous time to interact with them. And then also the Francis Schaeffer Institute at Covenant Theological Seminary in Illinois. It's about 4 hours for me here, and I have gone over numerous times there, and talked with Mark Ryan. Mark Ryan is now moved on to a different ministry, but he continues to be someone who has contributed much thought to this study for me, and I bounced a ton of things off him. And he actually has an appendix in this book, and Dr. Donald Williams actually has a foreword in this book. So the two people that you can respect there. And then after an ISCA conference in Dallas, I have this interesting anecdote here. I was able to catch an event at the Museum of Biblical Art where Nancy Piercy was speaking. Okay, so this was my final lecture where I was starting to feel like, man, I think I've got something here. I think I've got a book. And so after the event, I was able to catch Nancy Piercy alone for a moment, which is really rare if you've ever been to any of her events. She's usually not alone, but she recognized me from the Labrie conference where she had spoke. And so I explained to her what I was working on and what I had just presented and kind of laid it out. And she simply said to me, "You ought to write it." That seemed to me like the providential affirmation that I needed. If she says I should write it, then okay, I'll write it. And so I wrote it. So then a year later, providentially, I was able to catch her at St. Charles, Illinois, which is only about 2 hours from here. And I'm in Kansas City area, and I handed her a copy, and which she joyfully gave me a sincere smile and a hug. So so I feel like the overall, I mean, by the way, too, if I have, she signed my Saving Leonardo book to a fellow scholar, which was quite an honor. She was bubbling, and it was just wonderful to do that. But I just I felt like there are so many people that I feel like have spoken into this in various ways, and I'm just sort of writing it down. I'm being the scribe. And so that I try to bring that out so you can see a little bit of the background where this is coming from. And I guess none of us are really alone, right? We are all working on this together. So, so the specifics here, what I want to do is the books that most influence this. I want to just call your attention to just a couple books, and then we'll kind of move forward. But there are the first two are really short. This is what I was trying to do was try to stay as close to the core notion of Schaeffer's apologetic. So Jerram Barrs writes a little piece called Francis Schaeffer, His Apologetic, and it's a book published published by Bruce Little, called Francis Schaeffer, Mind and Heart for God. And in there, this is just a single chapter, which was basically his presentation at a conference, and that was it. It was one and done, very short, and so that was a limitation there. And then, but it was really good stuff. And then Mark Ryan also presented, and he likewise had a significant short-length essay, and that was just a one and done as well. So those two I try to stick really close to. And the reason for that, of course, was that Jerram Barrs was the previous custodian of the Francis Schaeffer Institute. Mark Ryan was his successor at the Francis Schaeffer Institute at Covenant Seminary. And then lastly, Truth or Love, the Apologetics of Francis Schaeffer by Brian Follis is a larger treatment, but it largely deals with all these classification issues and crazy things that had been going on in the academic world. He gets there, and Brian has a wonderful understanding of Schaeffer's apologetic and identifies it as being pastoral in scope, which is definitely a truth there. So I focused on staying close to those. I do mention some of the other ones, but I found, again, like what I was saying, there's a lot of classifications. I want to deal with the heart of it and stay close to it. I'm not disparaging any of the others. It's just that the primary source material, I think, that fed me the most as I was trying to get at this and then also expand it much more were these sources. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about methodology. I start off with an introduction on methodology. And one of the reasons I do that is because of that debate. But I'm more or less trying to explain a very complicated puzzle. Okay. So let me see if I can identify this. So when we talk about this, the methodology, Schaeffer says something about this himself. There is this isolated appendix in his book, The God Who Is There. It's in a later publication. Appendix A, The Question of Apologetics. And I talked to you already about this problem with classification and all that. And so Schaeffer says this: I have been mystified at times about what has been said concerning Schaeffer's apologetics. I do not believe that there is any one apologetic which meets the needs of all people. As I said in the text of the God Who Is There, I did not and do not mean that what I wrote in that book should ever be applied mechanically as a set formula.
Right.
Okay, there is no set formula for that meets everyone's needs. And if only applied as a mechanical formula, I doubt it really meets anyone's needs, short of an act of God's mercy. And he goes on to say, human nature being what it is, I'm sure some people have read The God Who Is There or come to L'Abri and have gone away thinking that's what they learned can be applied in mechanically as a formula. And we at L'Abri have tried to do everything we can do to dispel this. So Schaeffer is, in his time and in context, he's dealing with this question of, of classification already, and people are identifying this methodology, if you will, and he's afraid that they'll turn it into just a mechanical formula and abuse it. And that is really where he's coming from. And why is he saying that? Well, if we look at this, the one big question here, Schaeffer is avoiding some of the classification issues. He's not saying that he isn't of a certain school of thought. He's not saying that. But what he's saying is I should be free really to use whatever is needed for the glory of God. Mm-hmm. And some of this also is a little bit of a behind the scenes kind of nuanced debate, specifically in Reformed theology, Reformed apologetics. Him and Cornelius Van Til, there's sometimes some of the students really drew sharp contrasts between the two of them and felt like Schaeffer had sort of modified Van Til's approach too much. So that kind of identifies some of this. But Van Til, in one of his works, it's actually his key work it's a real small book, but it talks about apologetics. He picks apart some of what he considers to be classical apologetics, and he has a problem with it. And specifically that he feels like that it's related to the Catholic mode of thinking, which is really crouched in evidence rather than truly couched in the belief system of God as God first. I shouldn't have to assume that we argue from evidence. I should argue from God because God is the true thing. But Schaeffer would later say something to the effect that God made this world too. And doesn't it say in Romans 1 that God's testifying? So again, my point of this book was to get around a lot of this classification, but I always have to bring it up a little bit and then we'll move right by. But I'm going to explain why Schaeffer avoided this classification. He did not believe there was a single apologetic approach. He felt like that there were actually several that could be taken. So in his sense, I would actually label him as sort of unique, even though he still held on to the label of a presuppositional, and some have called him a modified presuppositional. But in any sense, he was trying to stay on task to his calling. He's like, this isn't important to who I'm called to be. I'm really called to this ministry of addressing people and helping people into the kingdom of God. I'm also addressing cultural issues, and there's a cultural side to my apologetic, and so he was concerned with that. Also, the things that he didn't like, you notice that he mentioned the mechanical. He also didn't like the citadel mentality. And what he means by that, he says this in another place, is that I'm not to make an apologetic so that I can just stand up in my castle and I can just hurl rocks at my opponents and win the day and never be touched in any way, shape, or form. That's not apologetics as far as Schaeffer goes. It's not winning the battle. It's winning the person. And sometimes with winning the person, Schaeffer even would later say, you have to take blows. Okay, so what he means by this is that I really have to engage people rather than just take the safe approach. Likewise, he's also saying that we are to avoid the mechanical. And what he means by that is that avoiding the mechanical is that we are not to treat people like machines. He is very firm on this position. And actually, you find this trickle into other areas of his thought, not just in apologetic sense, but also even in his spirituality, that we treat men as men. And the problem, he says, the problem with man is that man looks everywhere around him and everybody's treating him like a machine. But I want to treat him like God made him, because I want to treat him in the image of God. And so therefore we get that. And that's a whole bit of subject that we can get into as we go, but that's a good place if you want to talk.
But you're right. And it's a really important aspect. I get phone calls like nearly every day, or emails or something from someone saying, I am meeting with a fill in the blank. Could be a Jehovah's Witness, atheist, Wiccan, whatever. What verse do I give them? What place do I start? I've come to call that the silver bullet syndrome. Like there's an inspired, inerrant way to do this, that you shoot it right and everyone comes to believe. And I have to say, you're going to be dissatisfied with my answer. Because what you want to know is, why are they what they are? And that's going to give you a starting point and even a process to talk to them. And it's going to be different for you, for example, than it is for me. Because I handle information differently than you do. I think about the world somewhat differently than you do at times. And I communicate differently than you do. And the person I'm talking to, again, hears it differently than I would say it. And process it differently than I. So there's a complicated aspect of communication that I think is largely lost on many apologists. There's not a cut and dried, this is the way to do it.
Yeah, and with Schaeffer, you can tend to take that to an extreme, because Schaeffer not only goes to what are you thinking, but I mean, he literally says this, and I'll probably end up repeating it over again. But in Jerram Barr's little portion in that one book, he talks about how Schaeffer had told him, is if I only had an hour to speak with someone, I would listen to him 55 minutes, and then I'd spend 5 minutes, another 5 minutes telling them something of the truth. And he said that several times. He actually told that to Nancy Piercy as well, something to that effect. Because but I think the illustration there, he was on a plane or something. But the understanding is that I have to identify and understand the person as a human being created in the image of God. And even though their worldview is messed up, the truth can only get to them if we learn to address the avenues of inconsistency and just the avenues of where they're struggling.
Right.
Yeah.
And there you go.
So yeah, avoiding the mechanical. It's just a huge thing. Schaeffer was really adamant about that, and we'll expand on that further. So I want to give you some historical things that actually shaped Schaeffer's apologetic. And so we're kind of walk through his life a little bit here. But I feel this is important. It's one of the things I do in the book. In the book, I'm rather quick about it, because frankly, I could have spent a lot more time on each individual nuance, but I was trying to connect the dots for people so they can sort of see what was shaping Schaeffer. And it's not just that it was shaping him because these things happened to have to come about, Edith describes it in her tapestry book that they felt like they were on an escalator. And it was just one thing after the other, just going, and learning, and shaping. That God was forming something just miraculous in them. And you'll see from the events and timeline that there was just a ton of things going on. And so, first of all, consider this, Schaeffer's conversion. So Schaeffer came to Christ when he accidentally, he checked out a book, got the wrong book, and he got a Greek philosophy book. And so he started reading that book, and he realized that the philosophers in that book were asking all the questions. And so as he started thinking about that, he was going to a church, but the church didn't really believe in the authority of Scripture or even per se some of the elements. We'll talk a little bit more about this. You can see down later, they were having somebody speak there that didn't even believe that Jesus was the Son of God. And so, but Schaeffer, in order to be honest, intellectually honest, he felt the need for the next 6 months to devote himself to reading the Bible. And when he was done, he realized that the Bible answered all the questions. And the next time we meet, I'll be talking about these questions. But the Greek philosophy book that he checked out, it gave him the questions. And then as he started looking at how the Bible answered those, he realized they were answered. And so he came to faith. And actually, there's more to this story about how he came to faith, but he actually, he didn't know any other Christians that truly believed, but he was walking around in Philadelphia and he come across a tent meeting and come across this place, and he went in there and they were speaking, and then he ended up coming to faith at this tent meeting. So, you know, he didn't even know Christians. And so it was pretty wild. And later, interestingly enough, I'm going to show you God's providence in this, just a little bit of extra info here. He also later, the particular guy, his son ended up working under Gerald Ford as a spiritual advisor. And so it's rather fascinating, if you connect all these dots of things that began to happen. And so early evangelistic methods at Hampton, Sydney. If you know anything about Schaeffer's history, you know that at the beginning he was quite zealous. So one of the things he would do is that when his college friends would stay out late drinking on Saturday night, he told him he would help sneak them into bed as long as they got up in the morning and went to church with him. And so that was his mode of evangelism at Hampton, Sydney. And so he didn't have, of course, a lot of maybe wisdom in some areas there, probably, but what he had to deal with. But apparently he was very committed, and so pretty interesting. And then, so what's interesting, in 1932, Francis and Edith actually meet together at an apologetic encounter. So he's at home from college at his home church, and there's a speaker there speaking on how I know that Jesus is not the Son of God and how I know that the Bible is not the Word of God. So Schaeffer is not heavily educated at this point, but he stands up and gives at least as I understand, he gave at least a confession of his faith in general, that and what he believed, that it answers the questions and something of that. I don't know even exactly what he said, but in particular, the one that stood up that made waves was Edith. So Edith stood up and she made a rebuttal, and she was quoting from the Princeton scholars and Princeton Apologetics. And Schaeffer reaches over to his friend and says, "Who's that girl?" And so he will. So the two of them met in an apologetic circumstance,
Mm.
and so he goes over to her after that and asks us, "I'd like to walk you home." And she says, "I can't. I have a date." And he says, "Break it." And so she did so, and he walked her home.
Interesting.
And from then on, they were just unbreakable, completely united together, and a wonderful ministry form, because throughout their lives together, they were constantly knit. And Schaeffer even describes all of their works as being connected. Edith, of course, addresses those things differently. She's a little bit more flowery in some of her approaches to things, but she's very solid in her knowledge, and so it's fascinating.
When Dan says Princeton Apologetics, you can plug in that whole series we did on J. Gresham Machen.
Ah,
There you go.
That's what he came out of.
gotcha.
There you go. Let me animate this again. I clicked the wrong place. Okay. So, yeah, that's important. Oop. And don't click. I knew
You went
this
too
might.
far this time.
Yeah, you went too far this time. All right, let's go back. And there we go. All right. Everybody hold your breath. Okay, so this is what's fascinating. So in 1935, so not very long afterwards, he ends up going to Westminster. Okay, and so at Westminster, he's with J. Gresham Machen, but he ends up taking classes specifically there with Cornelius Van Til, and Cornelius sort of rocked Schaeffer's world. These are the classes that he took: Apologetics 411, Systematic Theology 512, Evidences 422, and they also took some stuff from Alan McRae, who later found Faith Theological Seminary. So right in the middle of Schaeffer's time there, there's a split that takes place, and so the seminary splits off, and so Schaeffer finished his time at Faith Theological Seminary. But what's important to note about his time studying under Cornelius Van Til is that he learned so much about the mode of apologetics that is commonly referred to as presuppositional apologetics. But what we find with Francis is that he is constantly evaluating it. It's not just standing still in some way. And we'll see that Schaeffer just kind of holds on to that, and he honestly felt that he was largely consistent with what Van Til had taught him at that time. And so there is some debate about that. There is at least one book that cites those particular classes there, and when you read over them, he has made an argument that what Schaeffer studied there would have been consistent with Schaeffer's theology at the time. So there's that. But anyway, as we go forward, so Schaeffer's being shaped by some of this new life in Christ, now finally at seminary, and then he goes to Faith Theological Seminary. And one of the things that he ends up doing is really getting inspired. And I'm not sure if he actually took classes at Faith Theological Seminary from Abraham Lance Latham, but he read about Abraham Lance Latham. That's a historical note I'll need to kind of study on. But Abraham Lance Latham founded what was known as a summer Bible school. It's what we would commonly call today as a vacation Bible school. Mm. And this was a huge impact on Schaeffer, because he realized that how to teach young people about Christ in a very special way. And so he took his first pastorate at a small church, Covenant Presbyterian Church in Grove City, Pennsylvania. It's if you ever look at it on a map, it's way out, and it seems like maybe in the middle of nowhere. It's probably surrounded by stuff now, but back in the day. But then Third Presbyterian Church is the next one that he goes, and he serves under Abraham Lance Lathan and learns directly from him. But he's largely an administrator there because they're in the middle of a building project. So Schaeffer ends up being the guy who is telling them how to build buildings and what they need to do, and working with all the people to do that. And so what we see is that Schaeffer's not really, it's like, I want to do the ministry. So what he ends up doing is going to a church called Bible Presbyterian in St. Louis, Missouri. And while he's there, he forms a huge summer Bible school. So much so, there were so many students that there was a huge article in the paper, and they were busing kids in from all over St. Louis to that church. I've visited the church. It's on Union and Enright in St. Louis. A beautiful, beautiful building, beautiful stained glass windows and everything. It's another congregation in there now. But it was rather fascinating just to go there and absorb that history. It's really something. So what we see though, I want you to take note of this contrast. So he's learning this heavy academic apologetics, so to speak, and then he's also learning how to communicate with children. And that actually is something that Schaeffer really felt like was part of his own criteria, and he also felt like that when he spoke with people, the people, whether they were young or dock workers or scholars, they all had the same questions. He began to realize this, specifically when he's in Grove City. There's stories about him. He would drive around and pick up kids there and in his car, and then take them all to church. And then he would drive and do like pastoral visits and everything. And they would all ask him the same questions in different ways. And he's like, I realized that they're asking the same questions, and they're just phrasing it differently. And he's like, if you can learn to understand the language of what they're saying, then you can speak to them.
Yeah.
And what's rather interesting too, if you think about this, the Bible school program, Schaeffer's early ministry, there's this book that he had, that he and Edith wrote called Everybody Can Know. It's still a little bit heavy for kids, but they use that as something of a study guide. I don't know if you can see that. Everybody Can Know. And it was something of their teachings for students. Now, what's kind of interesting, you read it now, there's some adults that probably couldn't understand some of the things they say, but it would be, it's a different time and a different place, but very interesting that this sort of was shaping him. Okay. So I think as you think about Schaeffer's apologetic, you have to think about his history and how God was forming him. And then next, as we take another step here, all of a sudden, Dr. Schaeffer kind of gets yanked out of that pastoral position, which he's done for, I think, some 10 years now. And he's asked by this board, the independent board of Presbyterian Foreign Missions, to tour war-torn Europe. Okay, so realize he's pastoring during the wartime. And so that obviously is shaping, but God is really going to take Schaeffer apart and put him back together here. He sends him on this tour, and he tours war-torn Europe and trying to see what is there that we can connect with. And the charge was for him to see how that we can strengthen that which remains. That was the core mission statement. And so he traveled around meeting with all these different groups, and he's connecting with them. The traveling is very hard. Sometimes even if you were riding trains at that time, you may have to even ride on top of the train, like the things, or you may hang out or this and that. So, I mean, everything is just broken down, and you can only ride so far. There's no sleeping on the train. That kind of thing is per se, probably maybe people manage, but just brutal travel situations. And so he's going through that, and then on the way back, his plane has a engine failure and begins to plummet. They're calling out Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. And he phones that in, or they phone that in, so to speak. I would say phone. They're on the radio. They're radioing that in, and apparently they're close enough that it gets some publicity, and it ends up being broadcast on the radio. They were talking about it, and so Edith starts praying, and then lo and behold, though, the plane recovers. They land safely. And he's so thankful that the Lord saved him in that situation, because he really thought he was going to die. But everything was so exhausting in that moment that when he got home, he had to take a serious long break, because he had a sort of a temporary breakdown. Everything that he'd seen kind of tore at his sensibilities. And if you know anything about Schaeffer has a big heart. And he hurt for Europe. He hurt for the things that he saw. He hurt for the devastation, and also the cause and need for Christ. And so he maybe felt overwhelmed. Schaeffer's a rather interesting guy. One thing too, I didn't mention with the whole him going to seminary is that he also has a disability. He's dyslexic. And so, imagine some of the things and challenges of being that, dealing with that too, in kind of this kind of war-torn area where you're traveling and trying to parse through everything and figure things out. So he ends up, based off that, deciding, I'm going to become a missionary. I really have to address this. He felt called to mission. So he moves to mission, to become a missionary in Switzerland, and works there. And he, in that time, that same year when he moves to Switzerland, he writes a little piece called A Review of a Review. Now, Schaeffer had written other articles at this time, not huge, but just a few. But this one is basically over a debate between Van Til and his other friend Buswell, J. Oliver Buswell. And so at that time, during the scope of the articles of back and forth between Cornelius Van Til talking about presuppositionalism, J. Oliver Buswell talking about classical or evidential apologetics, depending on what school of thought you would want to label it. And so they were going back and forth, and so Schaeffer writes in between and sort of tries to reconcile that a little bit, because he knew both men. What's interesting to me also is I realized that Schaeffer had already studied under Van Til, and so realized that Cornelius Van Til's notion of presuppositional apologetics had not been formulated until this debate around in the 1940 late 1940s. So Schaeffer studied under him before it was labeled that. So it's kind of interesting there for historical scope. So in 51 and 52, he has this spiritual crisis. And a lot of that is he's stripping things down again to their core. And I think it's in some ways maybe in some relation to some of the previous things he was dealing with, just really passionate about how do I reconcile what I see. I think he was maybe having a hard time with the war-torn Europe before, but then this time he was having a hard time with, here we've got all this stuff going on, we're trying to rebuild, and you got Christians who are speaking truth out of the Bible, but they don't have any love. And there's these debates going back and forth, and so that forms in him a spiritual crisis, and he wants to strip it down and start over again. And so in this, then he ends up writing finally, after he come to a reconciliation of these things, he writes what become the formation of true spirituality. I put true spirituality lectures. I think they have a different formal name at the time, but they later became his book, True Spirituality.
Mhm.
Now, you might probably ask him, well, I thought this was about apologetics. Why are you mentioning this true spirituality? Well, what you should understand is that in Schaeffer's world, they're not so separated. And I'll share this a bit later, but realize that Schaeffer said that God had never meant for us not to be the demonstration of his victory. And I'll give you the formal quote next time, but I'm maybe paraphrasing just a little bit there. But basically, he believed that the church was to be the demonstration of Christ's victory. And in order to do that, to present to the lost world, we have to present something of true spirituality. And that encompasses a whole lot of things, because it's not just us as people, but also the things that we do, the attitudes we have, how do we express and commend the gospel to others. And so we'll unpack all that. But
Cool.
well, so what are your thoughts? I want to get your thoughts on that notion in particular of connecting spirituality with apologetics. I think I know that I've met people sometimes who maybe saw the apologetics as the defense, and spirituality, true spirituality is over there, but maybe not like making it's like there's a mental connection that maybe needs to be fastened or something. Yeah, they're there, but maybe they've divided them in sections in their head. Is that, what do you guys think?
Well, I think apologetics could be quite brutal if you don't have true spirituality there. It's a knife. You can really cut people. You can cut people the wrong way. And you should believe what you're defending. That's huge.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, that's a wonderful thought. I mean, if you don't believe it, how can you not defend it, but how can you present it in a way that is even true, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and even now, I'm going to say something which in today's culture is almost anathema, but men and women tend to think differently. So just as a general statement, it's not always true. And one of the things that I kind of discovered, I was speaking at a homeschool conference, giving my testimony. I grew up as an atheist. I became a Christian after my son was born. And I laid it all out, how I came to the faith. And the problem of evil came up in the discussion. So I addressed that. And then a young woman gave her testimony. She also was an atheist. She came to the faith very differently, also through apologetics. And she also spoke to the question of the problem of evil. And I noticed something, and Joy and I have talked about this a lot, is when we males talk about the problem of evil, it's a task to figure out and assign understandings of. When a woman asks about evil, why did something happen? It usually, not always, but very often is because they have a friend who is dying of cancer, or they have a child that they're trying to reach out to. There's a personal connection going on. So it isn't trying to solve the problem, it's trying to figure out, how do I minister to this person? So we're back to, again, how apologetics works in terms of spirituality in the life of a believer. That's sometimes going to have to do also with why they're asking a question, where it's coming from, how does that all work together? It isn't always a mechanical, as you've been pointing out, presuppositional apologetics versus classical apologetics. Is none of that. It is, how do I answer this question about God in this situation?
Very good. Yeah.
That is true.
Exactly that. All right, let me move forward here to the next slide. So we'll capture that. And so we see in 1955, Schaeffer begins, he leaves the missions thing and it takes a step of faith. And he founds his ministry called L'Abri. Now, he didn't buy a ministry building or go out and take out a loan or anything like that. Basically, what they did is that, if you read Edith's book, L'Abri, they were about to be kicked out of the country. The particular parish they were in before didn't like that they were preaching Protestant beliefs in their Catholic community, so they wanted them booted, and so they had to find another place to live. And interestingly enough, too, in God's providence, God had actually put somebody in one of the authority figures there as far as approvals. That was actually a friend of Schaeffer's from his childhood. So God works all that out, and they end up founding L'Abri. And so what they did is they opened up their home. And at that time, when they opened up their home, they basically decided that they were going to let young people come and visit them at L'Abri, and they would allow them to experience the Christian worldview, the Christian life with them, and then talk with them and provide them things to consider. And it wasn't just a casual thing either. Edith's background too was rather interesting, because Edith had a background in hospitality. So she was highly creative. And so when you go to a L'Abri dinner there, it wasn't just like, yeah, we'll throw out a plate and a fork for you.
Yeah.
No, it was not like that. We're talking flowers. We're talking several courses. And my friend Sylvester Jacobs, which I consider, he's sometimes referred to as the photographer of L'Abri. He's the guy. Back in the day, a lot of the pictures that you will see of Schaeffer were taken by him. And I had the good fortune of God's providence meeting him in St. Louis. And he would, every time I came over to their house, or every time I came to the St. Louis conference, if I hadn't come over to his house already, he would, him and his wife would gang up on me and make me come and stay at their house. And then they would prepare all the meals, and they would do all the stuff, and they would just overwhelm you with love. And that mindset filled L'Abri, because they realized that they weren't just doing this because they were trying to form a ministry and say nice things. They were really wanting people to experience Christian love in a deep and satisfying way. And that included things like beauty. And so there's quite a significant movement that begins to transpire in their own home. And he said to the family, he said, we have this challenge. We have this challenge of being a very small work always, but we're to do it with the same devotion as if we were doing something much bigger. And I'm paraphrasing the last part, but that first part I know I got right. But so it is a tremendous move on his part and his family's part to take on this mode. And then they begin to, because it was sort of like it was a beautiful mountain area, and there was places to ski, and they made connections with the local colleges in like Geneva and places like that, and connected with young people in several churches. And so people just started coming over and staying with them, and it just grew. And then people would tell, you'd be going through, somewhere in Europe sometimes, and people, I've heard this several times before, and people were just talking to others, and they're like, yeah, you had to go up to you had to go up to L'Abri. Like, what are you talking about? And so it's a place you can go to get your questions answered, and they just let you ask anything. And so they would do it, and at that particular time, there were no barriers in that sense of like, oh, I might offend somebody. They would just do it, and people would do it. And so there's several books out like that. There's, I think, the hurried chase that ends at L'Abri was one of story of the friend of one of the opera singer that end up going and staying at L'Abri. And the unhurried chase was, she became an author, and she wrote multiple books. So they were really good friends, and then it just flourished from there. But that beauty was a huge part of it. And then at that same time, Schaeffer also wrote this tremendous little piece. If you want to do a Google search, The Secret, and did I spell it? Yeah, The Secret of the Power and the Enjoyment of the Lord. That particular title is super significant because he begins to form something of the basis of Schaeffer's spirituality in a small seed form as he's writing, and it's related to those other things that he had lectured on. But then this small article actually also connects the dots in some ways with his apologetic. So I think it's really significant there. Then later on, this is when everything kind of begins to take off, and this is sort of like the climax really here of his history as it moves forward into like the more formal stuff. There's more history, of course, about 20 years after this, but as far as him coming to the beginnings of his writings. So in 1965, he did a series of lectures, a week-long lectures, and they're called the Wheaton Lectures. They were never published, but they were, I say never published, never officially published, but they were published in a small book form for the students. And he, inside of that lecture series are the basis of a lot of his works. And you see something of his early apologetics beginning to really hold their substantial weight there. And we actually have 2 copies of the Wheaton Lectures in physical form. I was able to, by God's grace, find those. Actually, I found one, and my partner found another, Jason Chaitel. And so it's been quite wonderful. We digitized those, and we're able to read them, and so quite significant. And so then that became the work before the works. Okay. And then his official works, that God was there, Escape from Reason, He is there as He is not silent, that forms the trilogy. And there's a specific book, Death in the City. And that book, there's a chapter in there that deals with the concept of the man without the Bible. And that the man without the Bible, that really helps us see so much with Schaeffer's apologetic. So I would love to connect the dots more on some of those things, but we will kind of stop on the specific history, and then next time we can deal with the questions part of the lecture. But did anyone have any things that you'd like to say so far? What you've gathered from this?
Francis Schaeffer was a fascinating guy, and we can obviously, now that you're opening this up a little more deeper, I had kind of superficially known about him, and dealing with apologetics and all that. And it's just he really did realize, which is great, to connect and bridge the 2 things that were most important when dealing with people and talking to people about the Lord and giving them the truth of the gospel. So that's super, super awesome that he was able to do that and leave that legacy. I'm assuming that others can follow, which is important.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand too how deeply connected he was with the calling that God had set before him.
Exactly.
He had distinctly connected with the children before, and he had distinctly connected with the apologetics, and that really moved him. And then he goes on and he's connecting with some of these debates and discussions, but then he goes into forming the L'Abri, which is really a ministry to young people using apologetics. So everything connected in time that God had been forming for him, and then he, through his connections as a missionary over those years before the founding of L'Abri, he had a ton of connections throughout Europe, and so he was constantly involved with all of those the different missions areas as well. So it just began to flourish, and eventually ends up founding a church there.
Really cool.
Couple of things in this history that I think really bring into focus why Schaeffer is still important. He was dealing with what most people would think of as academic questions in a non-academic setting. And this both is contributing to the health of and the effectiveness of L'Abri, but also it shows why so many academic people have issues with him, because he's not fitting their mold. That doesn't mean what he's saying isn't true and powerful and important.
Right.
And the holisticness of it, Schaeffer had a wholeness in his approach to the whole Christian life, including ministry and apologetics, that I think you rarely encounter. Most people haven't thought these things through on the level that Schaeffer has. And you see that in the purpose statement that he wrote for L'Abri. The purpose of L'Abri is to demonstrate the existence of God in two ways. First, by giving honest answers to honest questions, that's the apologetics. Secondly, by demonstrating a life of faith. So you go to L'Abri and you listen, you participate in the discussions, and you listen to Schaeffer lecture, and he's giving you the apologetics and the answers, and he's doing that in a community that shouldn't be there. If God doesn't, because they didn't do any fundraising, they just prayed. And
they prayed. She wrote letters, but they were just letters.
Yeah,
and then people would. Yeah, I mean,
they didn't do traditional fundraising, and so you're hearing the answers in the context of the community that if God doesn't answer prayer, these people shouldn't be here. They couldn't be here. And the combination is what made it so powerful. It's apologetics flowing out of a wholeness of the Christian life. You see that in the apologetics completely integrated with true spirituality. You see it in the interest in culture and art and things that most Christian leaders before Schaeffer just weren't talking about at all. That theme of wholeness is one of the things that I think really explains why Schaeffer had such a powerful ministry in those days, and why he's still important for us today. So I'm very excited about Dan getting the chance to open these things up for us.
Yeah. Asterisk me says, I didn't really know anything about Mr. Schaeffer. I only knew about apologetics as arguing for the faith. This aspect of as a witnessing tool puts a great new light on how I form discussions, and that's a really important thing. And I appreciate what you said, Don. One of the things that we've been talking about a lot at our church revolves around this idea of asking questions. In fact, I proposed to my pastor about 6 or 7 months ago, and working on how to really put this together, of just letting people know we're a questionable church.
Right.
Which has kind of a double way of looking at it, right?
Right, exactly.
But the point is, we invite you to come in and ask questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so we've started a little bit. We have a group of about 10 or 12 Gen Zers. Love working with them. And they approach me pretty much every few weeks, sometimes every week, with some big pressing question.
Sure.
And the church, that part of the church is growing because they're letting their friends know, if you have a question, go talk to these people here. And so we gather together about every 4 to 6 weeks, feed them, have dinner, and just hang out, tell stories, ask questions, whatever it is that's concerning to you. We're going to do it on a bigger scale where once a month we'll open it to the public to just come in and ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a response to your questionable statement there.
Okay.
Like I mentioned, Sylvester Jacobs. He's was the Labrie photographer for so many years, and one of the things when I was talking with him, he said, they said they would answer honest questions and they would provide honest answers to honest questions.
Right.
But at that point, I say they lied. He said they would answer dishonest questions as well.
That's right.
Well,
So,
you're not obligated to answer dishonest questions, but you may use them. Usually, there's a group we have written about this. We call the lurkers. Lurkers are sometimes just in your group. They're listening, but they're not going to engage because they're afraid.
Background,
Usually,
yeah.
right. Or when we are online, there are times when we would debate somebody. I don't recommend debating online; it's kind of fraught with error. But sometimes we would engage, not for the one we're engaged with, because no matter what you say, they're not going to believe.
Mm-hmm.
But for the lurkers, they're watching, and they don't have to spend their time thinking about how they're going to respond to this because someone else is doing the arguing.
Right. They're
And
just
so they can listen, they can cogitate, they can think about it. What we have discovered in our adventures in paganism, for those who don't know anything about what I'm talking about, we go to conferences like Paganicon, where we've got witches and Wiccans and Druids, and as we have come to understand, roughly 80% of them grew up in the church.
Yeah.
And they had questions, and their questions were not answered. And so they left the church and went to something that gave them answers. They're not good answers, they're not true answers, but they were satisfying to them.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So the church needs to answer questions, and I think that's what you're saying Schaeffer did, specialized in come to us with the questions.
Yeah.
I agree, dishonest questions do not deserve honest answers. But sometimes it's a useful tool.
Sometimes
Right.
it is. Sometimes it's needed. But
Exactly.
well, so next time I will dive into Schaeffer's notion of the questions. In particular, because I think that leads us to a wonderful place where you can understand that he didn't just take this notion of questions casually. There was a tremendous depth to what he's looking at there. And the desire he had in particular was to make Christ known. But he had to obviously take that in, just like we were saying, take that in order to learn from them what they were dealing with. And I think you'll see that Schaeffer's views on the questions actually opens up a tremendous amount of strength for our understanding about how we even begin to think about answering people's questions.
Absolutely.
And so,
one of the last things you
Mhm.
said was in Athens, Georgia, in about 1982. I'm thinking is really just a year or two before his death. And in the Q&A, somebody was complaining, the kids we got now, they don't ask these questions anymore. And Schaeffer said, it was easy back in the 60s because the kids were asking the right questions. But if they don't ask questions, you have to ask them.
Mm-hmm.
True.
You bring the questions up if they don't.
Mm-hmm.
So he thought that the questions and handling them the right way was pretty important.
Mm-hmm.
So looking forward
All right.
to what Dan has to share about that next week.
I think that a lot of
youth pastors, especially ones trying to reach Gen Z and Gen Alpha, really should take notes from Schaeffer, because like in my own experience, like first church that we started like going to as a family, I like at one point like I went up to my youth pastor, who also happened to be like the main pastor of that campus, because like the other one had left anyway. You know, just visibly distraught, and I asked him like, how do I get saved? Like, how do I get to Jesus? And he was like, oh, have you told your parents that you want to come to Jesus yet? And I was like, no, I don't know how to tell them. He literally told me, oh, go tell your parents and get back to me, basically.
Wow.
Okay.
So that's the type of thing that we're getting from, you know, not just youth pastors, but also like the main pastors at these churches. So that's where I think, like, especially with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, where like a lot of us are starting to come to the faith, because we've seen like new atheism that doesn't work, and we're, you know, looking for something more traditional and more solid. I think that a lot of us are starting to raise a bit more questions, even if it's not exactly the, you know, specific language that some people are used to. And that's where a lot of youth pastors need to start taking notes from Francis Schaeffer about, like, okay, how do I answer these questions? How do I, you know, show the love of Christ to these kids while also showing them, like, faith isn't just based on feelings, it's also based on logical reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, before we wrap up, which we're going to do momentarily, I just want to point out that the Francis Schaeffer Secret Power of the and the Enjoyment of the Lord, you can go to Dan's site and get it there. For those who are in here, I posted it in the little communication thing there. You can click on that and grab it. I will also put it in the description underneath this YouTube. So if you want to go and get that, go for it. It's even free.
Can't be free.
Can't be free. So with that, we will see everybody that wants to be here next week.
Next week.
See you then.
Adios.
God
Thanks,
bless.